It was a normal winter morning, one of those peaceful Sundays where everything seemed to be at rest. I had just moved into my childhood home with my girlfriend, now my fiancée, and was beginning to settle into this new chapter of my life. The house had always been a symbol of comfort and family, a place that held countless memories. My parents had passed it down to me, and although it had seen a few renovations over the years, it still carried the charm of an old brick house. Our neighborhood was quaint, nestled on the outskirts, surrounded by vast stretches of forest. The woods had always been a part of my life, from the time I was a kid. My brothers and I would wander into those woods for hours, pretending to be explorers or adventurers. The thought of it never really scared me, at least, not until recently. That Sunday, as I prepared to head out to get my usual coffee, something felt off. The snow had been falling steadily through the night, coating everything in a thick layer of white. It should have been peaceful, but instead, I felt uneasy, like something was lurking just beyond my sight. As I stepped outside, I noticed it immediately. Footprints. But they weren't just any footprints, they were in the snow, right there in my driveway, leading toward my car. My first instinct was that it must have been my girlfriend. Maybe she woke up before me and went outside for some reason I didn't know about. But as I examined the footprints more closely, something didn't add up. For one, the footprints were too deep, as if whoever had walked here weighed more than her. And the path was strange. It led across the front yard, then seemed to veer off toward a hole in the side yard fence. The trail didn't go toward the house. It didn't go anywhere near the windows or doors. I stood there, staring at the trail. Whoever had left them had come straight from the woods. But why? Why would someone walk up to my car and immediately turn around and head back into the woods without ever coming near the house? I didn't hear anything. No doors opening or closing. No voices. Just a silence that made everything seem even stranger. I asked my girlfriend about it later that day, but she hadn't gone outside. She hadn't left the house at all before I did. She suggested that maybe it was some kind of animal, though I wasn't so sure. There was something unnerving about the idea that someone or something had been that close to our home, with no explanation. As the days passed, I tried to shake it off. It was probably nothing, right? Maybe a neighbor or someone else wandering through the snow. But then, more things started happening. Things I couldn't explain. A few years passed since that first unsettling experience with the footprints, and truth be told, I had pushed it to the back of my mind. Life had moved on. My fiancée and I were busy planning our future, and as we settled into the rhythm of daily life, the oddities seemed to fade into distant memories. The house felt safe again, or at least I convinced myself it did. But that winter in 2015, everything changed once more. It was a Saturday morning, early in the year, and I woke up to the usual cold winter air drifting through the cracks of our old brick house. The warmth from the heater never quite reached the edges of the rooms, and the house creaked with age. I had just gotten out of bed when I went to the kitchen to grab a cup of coffee, still groggy from a long week of work. But as I stepped into the yard, the first thing I noticed was something immediately wrong. Footprints. Not just a few, but a whole series of them everywhere. I stood frozen for a moment, the coffee cup in my hand forgotten. The yard, the driveway, the porch, the perimeter of the house, all of it was covered in footprints. They were scattered everywhere. Unlike the single trail I had found before, these tracks were thick and dense, as though someone had been walking in circles around the entire house. I quickly realized that these prints weren't from any animal or even from shoes. They were bare human footprints, the same as before, but now there were dozens of them. Whoever had been out here had walked for hours, probably in the dead of night, while my fiancée and I were asleep. My heart pounded. I looked around to see if anyone was nearby, but the street was as deserted as ever. The woods, which bordered our house on two sides, seemed more ominous than usual, as if the trees themselves were watching me. My feet took me across the yard, my eyes scanning for any further signs of what had happened. I didn't know what to think. I should have gone straight back inside and locked the door. I should have called the police. But something kept me rooted in place. I ran to the side of the house and quickly examined the area near the side yard fence where the footprints seemed to have originated. The trail led deeper into the woods. I paused, trying to understand the enormity of the situation. The prints seemed to lead to one of the old, rusty tool sheds I hadn't used in months. I didn't know why I was drawn to it, but something told me I needed to check it. The moment I reached the shed, I noticed that the door, which was always slightly ajar, had been pushed open. I could see that the lock was gone, completely removed. There was no sign of anyone being inside, but the air felt heavy, thick, like something had just been there. The unease that I'd been pushing down for years began to creep back up again. I backed away quickly, knowing I wasn't supposed to be out there alone. That day, I texted my fiancée as soon as I could, explaining what I had found. She was understandably freaked out, but I told her I'd stay calm. I didn't want to make her worry unnecessarily. She insisted we should call the police, but I refused. I didn't think anyone would take me seriously without any solid evidence. Instead, I decided to take matters into my own hands. That night, I armed myself with a flashlight and my rifle, the same rifle I'd used to scare off potential trespassers in the past. My fiancée begged me not to go out there, but I reassured her that I was just being cautious. I started walking toward the edge of the woods where the trail seemed to lead, but when I entered the woods, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The trees, which had always been a place of comfort in my childhood, now seemed to close in around me, their skeletal branches casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. I was nervous, but determined. As I walked, I realized the path had widened significantly. The footprints, which were easily distinguishable in the snow, led me to a clearing I didn't recognize. It was strange this area hadn't been there when I was a child. It looked like a small camp of sorts, a fire pit in the center with half-burnt logs. The ground was littered with remnants of charred wood and crushed leaves, and the more I looked, the more I could make out shapes. Twisted, unnatural shapes, hanging from the branches of nearby trees. I almost lost my breath. There were animal pelts and remnants of clothing, torn and ragged. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd just stumble upon in a peaceful forest. My mind raced, but before I could process what I was seeing, I heard something rustle from behind me, deep in the woods. I spun around, heart pounding, but the only thing I saw was the eerie flickering of shadows. I had to get out of there. Fast. I rushed back to the house, and when I arrived, I slammed the door shut behind me. My fiancée was already awake, clearly upset. I couldn't blame her. I didn't want to alarm her, but my gut told me something wasn't right. I told her about the camp, about the strange animal pelts, but I didn't mention the shadows I thought I'd seen. The next day, I went to the police. I wasn't sure what else to do. But once again, they told me the same thing: they couldn't take action without proof. They couldn't search the woods because there wasn't a real reason to. In the end, they gave me a list of advice, none of which helped. That winter seemed to stretch on forever. But just when I thought it was over, that strange feeling in my gut grew stronger. Every time I went outside, I felt like someone was watching me. I could hear footsteps at night, faint, too soft for me to pinpoint. Once, I swore I saw someone standing in the woods, just beyond the trees, but when I blinked, they were gone. By the time the snow began to melt, I was on edge. The footprints had never returned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still out there, just waiting. The winter had slowly crept into spring, and by the time the snow had melted, I hoped, desperately, that things would calm down. My fiancée and I both convinced ourselves that the bizarre events were behind us, that whatever had been happening in the woods was a mere fluke. But the gnawing sense of dread didn't disappear. It lingered just beneath the surface, like a shadow you can't escape. Then came the morning I will never forget. It was late February, a cold, clear morning. I woke up to the familiar smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen, the sun barely poking through the clouds. I had barely been awake for 5 minutes when I stepped outside to take in the crisp morning air. That's when I saw it. The footprints were back. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The same human-sized footprints, barefoot, leading from the woods to my car. My heart started racing. I stood there for a moment, processing the reality of what I was looking at. The last time I had seen footprints like these, I'd discovered them leading to the side of my car, then vanishing back into the woods. This time, however, they were different. There were more of them. Far more. I felt my stomach churn as I surveyed the scene. There were footprints all around the yard, some even leading up to the windows, and others curling around the side of the house. It was as though whoever had been out there was inspecting the place, like a predator circling its prey. This time, the tracks led to the shed, the very shed I had investigated months before. I knew, without a doubt, that this time something had been taken. It wasn't just a scare anymore. They were getting bolder. I called my fiancée to the door, and when she saw what I was looking at, she went pale. I could see the worry in her eyes. She was too scared to even speak. We stood in silence for a few moments, the weight of the situation settling heavily in the air between us. My immediate reaction was to check the shed, but my fiancée stopped me. She pleaded with me to call the police, but I was already walking toward the shed, my heart pounding. I knew the police wouldn't do anything. They hadn't the last time. I had to take matters into my own hands. I grabbed my rifle, feeling its weight against my shoulder as I slowly approached the shed. When I opened the door, my worst fear was confirmed. It wasn't just that someone had been there. The shed was ransacked. My tools, the ones I used for projects around the house, were scattered on the floor, some gone completely. The shelves had been turned over, and the wood pile was disturbed. But what sent a cold shiver down my spine was the discovery of something else, an old, faded piece of cloth, caught on the edge of one of the shelves. It was torn, worn, and it looked like it had been dragged along the ground. It definitely didn't belong to me. I stepped back, a creeping sense of terror crawling over me. Someone, or something, had been living in the woods behind my house, and they had been watching us for a lot longer than I realized. Later that day, my fiancé and I decided to call my dad. He had lived in the house longer than anyone, and he knew the property like the back of his hand. But when I told him what had been happening, he was strangely silent on the other end of the line. It wasn't like him. He was always full of advice or a joke to lighten the mood. But not this time. Finally, he spoke. "Son, I don't know who's been messing with you. But I'll tell you this much, there's more to this land than we've ever known. Your grandfather always said this place had secrets, things best left untouched. I never believed him, until now." I was left in stunned silence. What the hell was he talking about? He'd never mentioned anything like this before. My grandfather? Secrets? I didn't know if I should take him seriously or chalk it up to old family folklore. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. That night, I decided to go back into the woods, rifle in hand. My fiancé begged me not to go, but I couldn't ignore the feeling gnawing at me. I needed answers. I had to know what was going on. I left as quietly as I could, slipping out of the house under the cover of darkness. The woods felt different at night, even more oppressive, as though the trees were alive, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. I felt like I was being watched, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. I followed the trail again, the one I had found earlier. It led me deeper into the woods, and for a long time, I didn't find anything unusual. But then, just as I was about to turn back, I stumbled upon something that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a small clearing in the woods, nearly hidden by thick underbrush. And in the center of the clearing was a stone structure. It was old, weathered by time, and half buried in moss. My heart thudded in my chest as I approached it. There was no reason for this structure to be out here in the middle of nowhere, especially not in such a remote part of the woods. As I ran my hand over the cold, rough stone, I noticed strange markings etched into the surface, symbols, runes I couldn't recognize. They seemed to shift in the moonlight, as if they were alive. I felt an overwhelming sense of unease wash over me. This wasn't just some forgotten relic. It was something far older. Something that had been left there on purpose. I could feel the eyes on me again. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I slowly turned around. In the distance, just beyond the tree line, I saw them. Figures. At first, they were just silhouettes in the dark, barely visible, but as I stared, I realized they were walking towards me. Barefoot. No shoes, just like the prints I had found earlier. I bolted. I didn't wait to see who they were or what they wanted. My instincts screamed at me to run. I didn't stop until I was safely back at the house, heart pounding, gasping for air. When I got inside, my fiancée was waiting for me. She had been watching for me, pacing in the living room, her face pale with worry. I could tell she had been crying, and I knew I couldn't lie to her anymore. I told her everything about the structure, the symbols, the figures in the woods. But as I did, I saw something shift in her eyes. She wasn't just scared. She was terrified. She looked at me, shaking her head, whispering, "We can't stay here anymore. Whatever's in those woods, whatever you're dealing with, it's not over." That night, I made the decision to call the police. Not because I thought they could help, but because I needed someone else to know about what was happening. They came out, of course, but they didn't find anything. No footprints, no evidence. Nothing. They called it a wild goose chase, and I couldn't blame them. I was starting to feel like I was going insane. Was this all in my head? The only thing I could do was make sure my fiancée and I stayed safe. I started boarding up the windows, installing locks on every door. But deep down, I knew I couldn't escape what was coming. Not now. Not ever. The strange happenings didn't stop after that night. There were more footprints, more signs that we weren't alone. But I didn't dare go back to the woods, not after what I'd seen. What I hadn't seen. It's been almost a year now, and I'm still haunted by what I encountered that night. Those figures, the ones in the woods, they were real. And whatever they were, whatever they wanted, they weren't going to stop. We're still living in that house, still fighting to keep the shadows at bay. But every day, I wonder how much longer we can hold on before whatever it is that's watching us finally makes its move. The weeks that followed the discovery of the footprints were agonizing. The unease in my fiancée's eyes never left, and I could feel it gnawing at me too. Every time we stepped outside, it was like we were stepping into a trap. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the trees, waiting for us to slip up. The worst part was that the woods seemed different now. What once had been a peaceful, quiet escape for me was now a living nightmare. The trees, the rustling leaves, even the chirping birds felt off. Every creak of a branch, every snap of a twig sent me into a panic, heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing. What was out there? Why had they been coming so close to the house? Why did it seem like they were watching us? I spent days trying to figure out what to do. I considered calling a local paranormal investigator, but the thought of inviting strangers into my home to poke around didn't sit well with me. It didn't feel right. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that whatever was happening wasn't normal. It wasn't just trespassers or random wanderers. It was something else. I decided to take action. One evening, I grabbed a flashlight, my rifle, and a few supplies. My fiancée begged me not to go into the woods again. She had heard the stories, the rumors that the area had always been off, how it was said to be haunted or cursed. But I couldn't just sit there waiting for something to happen. I had to know the truth. That night, the moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the thick wood surrounding my house. The snow had melted by now, but the ground still felt damp beneath my boots. As I made my way into the woods, I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me. The usual sounds of the forest were absent, replaced by an oppressive quiet that made my skin crawl. I followed the same path that led to the clearing where I had found the stone structure. But this time, I wasn't alone in my mind. I had seen the figures. I had heard the whispers. I knew they were out there, waiting for me. The farther I walked, the more disoriented I became. The trees seemed to grow denser the deeper I went, their limbs twisting and reaching out like fingers, grabbing at me, pulling me into the darkness. It was as though the forest itself didn't want me there. After what felt like hours, I reached the clearing. But something was wrong. The stone structure was gone. Where it had once stood, there was now only a dark patch of earth. My heart sank. It wasn't possible. It couldn't have just disappeared. It was there. I saw it. I frantically scanned the area, my flashlight trembling in my hands. That's when I noticed the fresh marks in the dirt. Deep, jagged cuts, almost like something or someone had scraped the earth with a powerful force. My breath quickened, and my instincts screamed at me to leave, to turn back before it was too late. But I couldn't. I had to know. Following the marks, I stumbled upon something even worse. A large tree, its bark scratched and torn, was smeared with what appeared to be blood. My stomach churned. Whoever or whatever had been out here, it wasn't human. The marks were too deep, the blood too fresh. I backed away, my mind racing, trying to process what I was seeing. And then, out of nowhere, I heard it, a low, guttural growl. It was distant at first, but growing louder with each passing second. I whipped around, my heart hammering in my chest. In the distance, I saw them. The figures. Two of them. Tall, hulking shadows moving silently through the trees, like predators stalking their prey. I froze, unable to move, my body locked in fear. They weren't human, not entirely. Their movements were unnaturally smooth, too fluid, like they were gliding over the forest floor. And their eyes, they gleamed in the darkness, reflecting the light of my flashlight, and for a moment, I thought they might be glowing. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from them. They were getting closer. Too close. My pulse raced, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as the figures approached, their eyes never leaving mine. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't know if they even knew I was there. But I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I turned on my heel and sprinted back the way I came, crashing through the underbrush, branches slapping my face as I ran. I could hear them behind me, but I didn't dare look back. The sound of their footsteps was too fast, too smooth. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the woods, my chest heaving with panic. I turned around, expecting to see them standing right behind me, but there was nothing. The forest was still, as if nothing had happened. I ran back to the house, locking the door behind me, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I didn't know what I had just seen, but I knew it wasn't human. Whatever those things were, they were not of this world. And they weren't leaving. They had been watching us. And now, they were waiting for the right moment to strike. When I told my fiancée what happened, she listened in stunned silence. She didn't question me or dismiss what I had seen. She simply nodded, as if she already knew. That night, we both stayed awake, staring into the darkness, the weight of the forest pressing in on us. Neither of us could sleep. Neither of us felt safe. And as I lay there, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The figures in the woods had made their presence known. They were patient. They would wait. And when the time was right, they would return. I don't know how much longer we can stay here. We've talked about leaving, but every time I think about it, I can't help but feel that it's too late. Something is coming. Something that we can't escape. But I can't leave without knowing who or what these creatures are, and why they've been haunting our land for so long. There's one thing I'm sure of, whatever happens next, it's not over. The weeks following the strange footprints were unbearable. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind in the trees made my heart race. It wasn't just my fiancée who felt the unease, it consumed me too. It was like the woods had suddenly become something far darker, a living, breathing entity that was waiting, watching. I could feel its eyes on me every time I stepped outside, and I knew something wasn't right. Something was out there. I spent my days trying to act normal, going to work, pretending nothing had changed, but at night, when the house creaked and groaned with the wind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Even when I was home, alone, and trying to shake off the growing sense of dread, I couldn't help but feel that something was drawing closer with every passing day. One evening, I grabbed a flashlight, my rifle, and my courage. The situation had gone too far, and I couldn't sit idly by. I had to find out what was in those woods. What was haunting my family. My fiancée had begged me not to go, but I couldn't let this fear continue to control me. The idea of just waiting for whatever was out there to come to us made my skin crawl. It was late by the time I set out, the moon hanging low in the sky and casting an eerie, pale glow over everything. The snow had melted in some places, but the ground was still damp, making every step I took seem louder than it should have been. I made my way toward the edge of the woods, trying to ignore the sounds of my own heart pounding in my chest. At first, the trees seemed to welcome me as they always had, their branches swaying gently in the wind, creaking like old friends, but the further I went into the woods, the heavier the air grew. It was as though the forest itself had begun to close in around me, trapping me in its grasp. Every rustle of the leaves sounded like footsteps, every snap of a branch felt like a warning. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that my imagination was running wild. After all, I had been out in these woods countless times before, exploring, hunting, just enjoying the solitude. But tonight felt different. The silence in the woods felt too thick, too suffocating. And then, I found it. A clearing, eerily silent, that looked like it had been untouched for years. But that wasn't what caught my attention. No, What stopped me dead in my tracks was the unmistakable outline of something old and decayed sitting in the center of the clearing. The stone structure, the one I had thought was gone. But there it was, a crumbling ruin in the middle of nowhere. My heart hammered in my chest as I slowly approached. It didn't make sense. The structure had been gone, at least, I thought it had. How could it have just reappeared in the same spot? It was as if it had been hidden, waiting for me to return. My stomach churned. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the structure. The familiar feeling of dread washed over me again, and I knew I couldn't stand there any longer. As I turned to leave, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The dirt around the stone foundation was disturbed, fresh signs of movement. It was as if something or someone had recently been there. A cold chill ran down my spine. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of breathing. Not my breathing, not the wind, but something else. Something far too close. My breath hitched in my throat, and I froze. The sound was low, deliberate, almost mocking. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just trees, shadows, and the stillness of the night. I didn't wait to see what was lurking in the darkness. I ran. Every snap of a branch behind me made my heart skip a beat. I could feel eyes on me, even though I dared not look back. My legs burned with each step, but I didn't stop, not until I burst out of the woods and back onto the familiar trail near my house. I wasn't even sure how long I had been running, but I didn't care. I needed to be inside, behind locked doors, as far from that place as possible. When I made it back to the house, my fiancée was waiting for me, worry etched on her face. I could barely speak, but she didn't need to hear the details. She could see it in my eyes. Whatever I had encountered out there wasn't human. It wasn't even alive in the way we understood it. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. There were too many questions in my mind. Why had the structure reappeared? Why did I feel like I had been drawn there? And why did I hear that breathing? Was I losing my mind, or had I uncovered something that had been buried for years? That night, neither of us could sleep. The air was thick with tension, both of us aware that something far beyond our understanding was lurking just outside the house. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like I was being suffocated by the silence that had settled over everything. And then came the knock. It was so faint at first, I thought I had imagined it. But there it was again, louder, more insistent. I stood frozen, my fiancée gripping my arm, her eyes wide with fear. Who could it be at this hour? We weren't expecting anyone, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. I made my way to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. As I opened it, I was met with the most terrifying sight of my life. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure. A tall, dark silhouette, completely obscured by the shadows. It looked human, but something about the way it stood, its unnatural stillness, told me otherwise. Before I could say a word, it spoke. Its voice was cold, raspy, like gravel scraping against metal. "You shouldn't have come back." The words sent a shock of terror straight through me, freezing me in place. I wanted to slam the door, to run, but I couldn't move. My fiancée was too scared to even breathe. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching us. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. No sound, no movement, just the eerie silence of the night. I closed the door, my heart racing, and locked it tight. We didn't sleep that night. We couldn't. Not after that. In the morning, we tried to rationalize it, tried to convince ourselves that it was a hallucination, a trick of the mind, but deep down, I knew better. I knew what I had seen. And I knew that the woods, the house, the figure, everything was connected. Something was out there, and it was waiting. We packed our things and left, unsure of what the future held, but certain of one thing: the nightmare wasn't over. Whatever was in the woods, whatever had been watching us, was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The days following the figure's appearance at our doorstep were filled with unease, but we tried to carry on with life as best as we could. We moved around the house like ghosts, our every step a reminder that something dark, something powerful, was lurking just beyond the threshold. My fiancée and I were both on edge, sleeping with the lights on, keeping the blinds shut, always aware of every sound that echoed through the house. The haunting silence felt like it was waiting for us to make a mistake, to falter in our vigilance. But the knock at the door was only the beginning. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure, the thing that spoke to us, was still out there, somewhere close by. I couldn't ignore the thought that it wasn't done with us yet. That it had come for a reason, to deliver a message, or worse, to ensure we couldn't escape what had been set in motion all those years ago when we first moved in. One evening, after an exhausting day of work, I decided I couldn't stay cooped up inside anymore. My fiancée was out, visiting her parents for the weekend, so I took the opportunity to clear my mind with a walk. I needed to get away from the house for a bit, breathe in some fresh air, and hopefully shake off the oppressive weight that seemed to have followed me everywhere. I didn't go far. The woods weren't far from the property, but I'd never felt more wary of them in my life. The moonlight seemed to filter through the trees, casting long, eerie shadows that stretched unnaturally across the ground. The wind was still, and the forest was so quiet that even the usual rustle of leaves felt muffled, like the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I kept walking, though, trying to tell myself I was just being paranoid. But as I ventured deeper into the woods, the familiar path I had once walked so often seemed different. Twisted somehow. The trees seemed closer, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands, and the air grew thick, almost suffocating. It wasn't just the oppressive silence, it was the feeling that something was watching me. I shook the thought away. Get a grip, I told myself. As I walked further, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: a faint trail in the dirt, half covered by fallen leaves. It wasn't a path I had ever walked down before, but it looked familiar. Something about it seemed to tug at the edge of my memory, like I had been here before. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I followed the trail deeper into the woods. That's when I saw it: the structure. The one I thought was gone. The stone ruin that had appeared out of nowhere in the clearing the last time. But this time, it looked different. It seemed older. The stone was weathered, covered in moss and ivy, and the air around it felt heavy, charged with some kind of unseen energy. I felt the same unease creep up my spine, but I couldn't bring myself to turn away. My feet moved on their own, drawn towards it, as if some invisible force was guiding me forward. The ground underfoot seemed to soften with each step, and soon, I was standing in front of it, staring at the crumbling walls. The place was hollow, the air inside thick with the scent of mildew and decay. It felt wrong. That's when I heard it. A sound, soft at first, like a low whisper carried on the wind. It was so faint, I almost thought I imagined it. But then, it came again, louder this time, a voice, distorted and distant, speaking words I couldn't make out. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was going on. I had to uncover the truth. I stepped closer to the ruin, the cold air biting at my skin as I peered into the darkness. That's when I saw them, figures, moving in the shadows. At first, I thought they were just my eyes playing tricks on me, but no. They were real. There were at least 4 of them. Tall, hunched figures, cloaked in darkness. They moved with an unnatural, jerky motion, their faces obscured by the shadows. I couldn't make out any details, but I could feel their presence, their eyes watching me even though I couldn't see them. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My body felt frozen, rooted to the spot. The whispers grew louder, like the voices were speaking directly to me now. The words weren't clear, but I could feel their meaning deep in my bones. Come closer. The urge to obey was overwhelming. It was like the forest itself was calling me, pulling me in, and I couldn't resist. One step. Another. Until I was standing at the entrance of the ruin, my breath shallow, my mind racing. That's when they moved. One of the figures stepped forward, its silhouette outlined in the pale moonlight. My heart stopped as it raised its arm, pointing directly at me. The other figures remained still, watching. I don't know what happened next. My body moved on its own, backing away, but my mind was screaming to run. I stumbled back down the path, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my legs trembling with every step. I didn't stop until I reached the house. I didn't even look back. The whispers followed me, though, echoing in my ears. They never stopped. Not once. When I got back to the house, I bolted the door behind me, locked all the windows, and collapsed on the couch. My fiancée hadn't returned yet, and the house was eerily quiet. But I couldn't relax. The figures in the woods, the whispers, the strange pull, they were still with me, in my mind, in my soul. I had been in that ruin before. I was sure of it. The feeling of familiarity, of being drawn to it, it wasn't just paranoia. I had been there, years ago. But why? What was it? What was the true purpose of this place? And then I realized something. The woods had been waiting for me. For all these years, it had been building to this moment. That structure, those whispers, those figures, they had all been preparing for me to return. But what did they want? As I sat there, trying to make sense of everything, my fiancée walked through the door. She was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice shaking. "I went to visit my parents, and when I came back, I saw something in the woods. Something watching the house. It was dark, but I saw the outline of figures. Just like the ones you described." I stared at her, unable to speak. And then it hit me, the house, the woods, the ruin, it was all connected. Whatever was in those woods, whatever had been watching us, had never truly left. And now, it was closer than ever. The moment my fiancée, Sarah, spoke those words, everything I thought I understood about our situation shattered. The figures, the whispering, the pull I'd felt to that ruin in the woods, it was all connected, and worse, it had been waiting for us. But Sarah's confession that she had seen those figures too, that they were watching our home, changed everything. My first instinct was to panic, but I couldn't. I had to stay calm. Whatever was out there had been watching us for years, but now, it was no longer content to hide in the shadows. It was getting bolder, more direct. And it was clear that whatever it wanted, it wasn't going to let us escape easily. I didn't want to show Sarah how scared I was. She was already terrified, her eyes wide with fear, but I had to keep it together for her sake. We couldn't let fear control us. We needed answers. We needed to understand what was happening before it drove us insane. I immediately called Theo, a close friend and someone I trusted. Theo was an experienced outdoorsman, a skilled tracker who had spent more nights in the wilderness than I could count. If anyone could help us understand what was going on, it was him. I told him everything: the footsteps in the snow, the figures in the woods, Sarah's sightings, and my own terrifying encounter at the ruins. He listened quietly, and then, after a long pause, he said, "I'm coming over. I'll bring my gear." An hour later, Theo arrived. We wasted no time. We grabbed flashlights, rifles, and anything else we might need. The house was eerily quiet now, the silence almost suffocating. The atmosphere was thick, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. As we walked toward the woods, I couldn't stop my mind from racing. The whispering, the cold chill that seemed to follow us, the way the figures in the woods had always been just out of reach, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle that was slowly coming together, but none of it made sense. Who were these figures? Why were they always watching? And what did they want with us? The trees loomed above us, their skeletal branches reaching out like fingers, blocking the moonlight. The air was thick with fog, the cold biting at our faces as we moved deeper into the forest. The only sound was the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional snap of a twig. "Do you think it's them?" I asked Theo, my voice barely above a whisper. "Could be," he replied, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. "I've been in these woods a lot, but I've never seen anything like this before." We walked in silence for a while, moving cautiously, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up with each step. Then, without warning, Theo stopped in his tracks. He held up his hand, signaling for me to be quiet. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I strained my ears, but all I could hear was the rustling of the trees in the wind. But then, I caught it. A faint whisper, carried on the wind, like a voice coming from far away, just out of reach. My heart skipped a beat. I recognized the sound. It was the same whisper I had heard that night by the ruins. But now, it was different. It was closer. Louder. Theo and I exchanged a look, both of us equally unnerved. Without saying a word, we continued forward, the whisper growing louder with each step. We reached the clearing where the ruin stood. The stone structure looked even more ominous in the dim light, its jagged edges cutting into the night sky. As we approached, I noticed something else: footprints. More of them. Fresh ones, leading right up to the ruin. "Someone's been here recently," Theo said, his voice low. "Let's move cautiously." We crouched low, trying to make as little noise as possible as we followed the tracks. They led right up to the ruin, and then disappeared. Just like that. No further trail. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise again. This wasn't normal. There was something unnatural about the way those tracks ended so abruptly. It was like the person or whatever it was had just vanished into thin air. Theo and I exchanged a look, both of us feeling the weight of the moment. Whatever was going on here, we were in the thick of it now. We had to press forward. The only thing we could do was confront whatever this was. Suddenly, a figure appeared from behind the ruin. At first, it was just a silhouette against the backdrop of the trees, but as it stepped forward, I could see it clearly. It was one of the figures. One of the same ones I had seen in the woods all those years ago. This time, though, it wasn't just a shadow in the distance. It was real. Solid. And it was staring directly at us. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. Theo's hand was on my shoulder, urging me to stay calm, but even he looked rattled. The figure stepped forward again, closer now. It was tall, too tall, and its movements were jerky, almost mechanical, as if it wasn't entirely human. The eyes glowed faintly in the dark, like two distant stars, and its skin was pale, stretched tight over its bones. It didn't say anything, didn't make a sound, but the air around it was charged, vibrating with some kind of dark energy. Theo raised his rifle, his hands steady despite the situation, but I stopped him. "Wait," I whispered, though I wasn't sure why. "I don't think we should shoot it." Theo looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "It's not human, it's a threat." "I know," I replied, my voice shaking. "But it's not attacking. It's just watching us." For a long moment, we stood there, locked in an eerie silence with the figure. Then, without warning, it moved again, but this time it didn't come closer. It turned, its jerky movements continuing, and walked back into the woods. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to follow it, to understand what was going on, but something inside me told me to leave. To get out of there while we still could. "We're not alone," Theo muttered, his eyes still scanning the darkness. "There's something else out here." Suddenly, the whispering started again, only this time it was louder, surrounding us from all sides. The voices were unintelligible, but there was something terrifying about their tone. They were like a chorus, speaking in unison, chanting something I couldn't understand. Theo turned to me, his face pale. "We need to get out of here. Now." We didn't hesitate. We turned and ran, crashing through the woods, not daring to look back. The whispering followed us, growing louder with each step, until it felt like it was inside my head. We finally made it back to the house, breathless, hearts pounding. We slammed the door shut behind us, locking it and bolting the windows. But we both knew that what we had seen, what we had heard, it wasn't over. Whatever had been in those woods had made its presence known, and it wasn't going to leave us alone. The worst part? We both knew it was waiting for us to come back. The night was eerily quiet after we returned to the house, but the silence was heavy, unnatural. Sarah, Theo, and I sat in the living room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Theo, ever the rational one, insisted that what we had encountered wasn't human, that it was something else, something ancient, maybe. I wasn't so sure. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like we had crossed a threshold, one that we could never undo. We were no longer just trespassers in these woods, we had become part of something far older, something that had been watching us for years. I remember sitting there, the weight of those glowing eyes still etched in my mind, when Sarah finally spoke. "Do you think it's over?" she asked, her voice trembling, though she tried to sound brave. I looked at Theo, whose face was drawn with worry. "I don't know," I said quietly. "But I don't think it's over. Not by a long shot." That night, none of us slept. The shadows seemed to creep in around us, even though the windows were sealed tight. Every gust of wind, every creak in the floorboards felt like a prelude to something worse. The whispering that we'd heard out in the woods continued to echo in my mind. It was almost as if it was calling to me, coaxing me to venture back out, to follow it deeper into the woods. But I resisted. We all resisted. The next morning, the first rays of dawn barely pierced the thick canopy of clouds that had settled over the land. I was exhausted, my body aching from the adrenaline of the night before, but I had no choice but to get up. We had to figure out what to do next. We couldn't just sit there and wait for whatever was in those woods to come for us again. But as I stepped outside into the crisp morning air, something was off. The woods, which had always been so familiar to me, felt alien, as if they were no longer the peaceful haven they once had been. And in the distance, I thought I saw something, a figure, standing at the edge of the tree line, just outside of the clearing near the ruin. I squinted, my heart racing, but the figure was gone in an instant, vanishing into the thick fog that had rolled in, as though it had never been there at all. I didn't know if I had seen it, or if my mind was just playing tricks on me after everything we had been through. "Are you okay?" Theo asked, coming up behind me. He had a worried expression on his face, as if he could sense the tension in the air. "I saw something," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "A figure. It was standing by the trees, but when I looked again, it was gone." Theo didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, he walked over to where I was standing and peered into the woods, his eyes narrowing. "You sure you're not just seeing things?" he asked, though I could tell from his voice that he wasn't so sure himself. He was a man who didn't easily get spooked, but something about this was clearly unsettling him. I don't know, I said, shaking my head. It felt too real. Too deliberate. The air between us hung heavy with unspoken thoughts. Was it one of the figures from last night? Or was it something else? Something more dangerous? The longer we stood there, the more I felt like we were being watched, stalked, even, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before whatever had been haunting us would make itself known again. We tried to go about our day, but the unease that had settled over us lingered. Sarah couldn't stop looking out the windows, her eyes darting nervously toward the woods. And as the sun began to set once more, I found myself standing at the edge of the porch, staring into the darkening trees. That's when I heard it again. The whispering. It was faint at first, just a murmur carried on the wind, but then it grew louder. It wasn't a voice I recognized, it was distorted, like multiple voices layered on top of each other, speaking in unison, but the words were impossible to understand. "I know you're out there," I muttered under my breath, my fingers gripping the railing. "I'm not afraid of you." The whispering continued, louder now, but it was followed by something worse, the sound of footsteps, faint at first but growing closer, as if something was walking through the woods toward us. My heart pounded in my chest, and before I could turn around to tell Theo, he was already by my side, his rifle at the ready. "We need to go now," he said, his voice tight. I nodded, but before we could make a move, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Absolute silence. The kind of silence that felt wrong. Then, something shifted. The air grew colder, a sudden chill that seemed to seep into my bones, and I knew whatever was out there, it wasn't just watching us anymore. It was drawing closer. It wanted us. "I think it's time we leave," Sarah said, her voice trembling with fear. She was standing at the doorway, her eyes wide and filled with terror. "We can't just leave," I replied, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. "We need answers. We need to confront this, or it will never stop." But even as I said the words, a thought struck me, one that I couldn't ignore. What if it was too late? What if, by confronting it, we were making it stronger? The whispering intensified again, and in that moment, I realized we had no choice. Whatever was in those woods, whatever had been stalking us for years, was closing in. It wasn't going to stop until it had us. And that's when I understood the horrible truth: we weren't just dealing with shadows. We were dealing with something far older, something far darker, and it had been waiting for us to come to it. Theo tightened his grip on his rifle, and for the first time, I saw true fear in his eyes. "We need to get inside," he said urgently. "Now." We rushed into the house, locking every door, every window. But the whispering didn't stop. It was as if it had followed us, and I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't over. In fact, I felt like it was just beginning. Later that night, as we sat huddled together in the living room, I heard a noise from outside. A low, guttural growl, just barely audible over the wind. I tried to ignore it, but then came a knock on the door, soft at first, and then louder, more urgent. Someone was outside. And it wanted in. The door rattled under the force of the knocks, and I knew, deep down, that we weren't going to make it out of this unscathed. The creature, or whatever it was, had found us, and now, we had to face it. And that's when I heard it. A voice. It was the voice from the woods, the whispering voice, but this time, it was clear. It wasn't speaking to me. It was speaking to Sarah. "Come with us," it said. "You're meant to be here with us." The door rattled again, and my blood ran cold. It was time.